news of the day here on Tuesday, the Patriots tweeting out a notice here today that they have promoted college scouting director Matt Groh to director of player personnel. So Matt Groh will now be the successor to Dave Ziegler, who was the successor to Nick Caserio. And when you peel back the curtain here of this decision to promote Groh and not go with a guy with a little bit more of a resume, maybe an Elliott Wolf, I think that this relates to the Caserio and Ziegler promotions as well, in that Matt Groh is one of theirs, right? He is somebody that, to use a Bain quote, he grew up in the Patriot way, right? He was born in it. He did not adapt it or adopt it like Elliott Wolf did. He was crafted by it, starting in 2011 with the Patriots. As I mentioned, served last year as the college scouting director. His father, Al Groh, is a longtime Belichick Parcells coaching tree assistant. So this is not a major surprise to me in that this is pretty much status quo for the Patriots. This is how they've always sort of done it, promoting from within and promoting a guy that's gone through the ranks and paid his dues and worked his way up to the top. Now the question is I think for a lot of Patriots fans, who the heck is Matt Groh, right? And why do we care about Matt Groh? And secondly, what this means for the team moving forward.
Well, the other interesting thing about it to me is that when they promoted Ziegler last year, right, when Caserio had left, and Caserio had been the director of player personnel since 2008. So they hadn't had to make a move like this in a while. Ziegler's background was pretty much exclusively pro personnel, working in pro personnel. So that's players who are already on the roster, working with contracts, scouting other teams, things like that. Now you bring in Matt Groh, whose background is the opposite. It's almost exclusively college scouting. So not to say last year's draft wasn't good. It was, but did they do anything? There wasn't really a fireworks move. Like, as much as we were all like, oh my God, they took Mac Jones. That was kind of the expected pick. They moved up to get a player who had fallen, which is pretty textbook. And they kind of went chalk from there. Whereas in free agency, right, uncharacteristically aggressive. So you had the guy with the pro personnel background comes in and you have this massive free agency period. Now you're bringing in a guy with the draft background. So that tells me maybe they have a little bit bigger plans or more extreme plans for the draft this year.
It's interesting because Groh, I think, was somebody that has moved up quickly in terms of title here. You know, for a long time, he was bouncing around the Patriots scouting department, working his way up the ladder. And then all of a sudden he gets a title last year. And then obviously an even bigger title this year. You mentioned them going after the draft a little bit differently. I do think you look at that draft class last year, everybody that has been involved in that draft class last year has gotten a pat on the back from somebody, whether it's the Patriots promoting a guy like Groh after a strong draft class or Ziegler going ahead and getting a general manager job with the Raiders. But I think the one thing that I look at too with this is that Groh, I don't think is going to be a one and done de facto general manager here for the Pats. And you mentioned Nick Caserio held that title for over a decade, right? 2008 to 2019. Then in back-to-back off seasons, essentially, the Patriots lose Ziegler and they lose Caserio to other teams. And if they had promoted a guy like an Elliott Wolf, who is now technically a scouting consultant for the Patriots, I think that a guy like Elliott Wolf does a good job as a scouting consultant with the Patriots. He probably is in line to get the general manager title someplace else as well, maybe even as soon as next offseason. He actually interviewed for a few general manager positions this year. So if he does it again, then you know that he's going to be somebody that a lot of teams are going to be after next year. So I look at this with Groh and say, could the Patriots be hoping that he's going to be around for a while and they won't have to keep recycling director of player personnel or de facto general managers like they have had to do over the last couple of years with Caserio and then Ziegler leaving the nest. So Matt Groh, like I said, football family, bloodlines, right? Going all the way back to Al Groh. His brother, Mike Groh, is the Eagles wide receivers coach.
Is he Eagles or Giants?
Giants, excuse me. Yes,
right. He just moved over there.
Yes, he was with the Colts and now he's with the Giants. I knew it was an NFC East team, but got the wrong one. Giants.
Well, he was the Eagles OC at one point.
Yes.
So you're not totally wrong there. Yeah.
Yeah, under Doug Peterson, he was
Yep.
the Eagles OC after Frank Reich left for the Indianapolis job. They gave the OC title to Groh. So this is NFL bloodlines. These are blue blood guys. So I think in one respect that you can be happy about, Alex, this is not a math nerd, right? This is not an analytics guy. This is not a new age hire. This is not, Billy Bean or Paul DePodesta or whatever. This is a blue blood type of old school scouting coaching family that goes back generations with the Grohs. So to me, it is a little bit of a surprise that it wasn't Elliott Wolf, but ultimately I think that this is pretty par for the course for the Patriots when you actually look into Matt Groh's background, look at how he's gotten here, and look at what we've seen in the past from his family tying to Belichick as well. Al Groh was an assistant with Bill and Bill Parcells, under Bill Parcells, with the Giants, with the Patriots in the 90s. I mean, goes all the way back with those two.
Well, when he worked for Bill too in Cleveland. So
Correct.
he did directly work for Bill. Yeah, this is, it's pretty textbook. It's pretty textbook. Football family has the ties to both Bill and Parcells. Yeah.
So I think the other question I wanted, and then we're going to get into some of these coaching exodus here to the Raiders. The other question I wanted to present here is, do you really feel, free agency aside, because we've never seen the Patriots spend like that, we've never seen the Patriots go after it like that. You mentioned it a few minutes ago. Everybody kind of talks about last year's draft class, like the Patriots completely changed their philosophy in the draft. And I don't necessarily see it that way. Like, they drafted 2 guys from Alabama with their top 2 picks, right? And then they drafted 2 more guys from Oklahoma. I guess maybe you could make the argument that they went more with power programs, right? Power 5 type programs, blue blood type programs. But at the same time, I don't know if the 18 draft, the 19 draft, you're looking at 2 top picks from Georgia in 18, 19, a Pac-12 pick, Michigan with Chase Winovich, Alabama with Damian Harris. The way that they've handled the draft last year, I don't really think is that much different than what they've always done. They just happened to hit on the picks, at least in the short term so far.
I think the one thing that's different is they went more chalk, right? Mac Jones was the consensus pick at 15. Like, everybody said, this is the pick that makes the most sense. They traditionally didn't do that. You want to go back to 2020, we're all talking about who was the safety from Alabama that year? Why am I blanking on this?
Safety from Alabama in 2020. Keep talking and we'll figure it out.
Xavier McKinney. We're all talking about Xavier McKinney's going to be on the board. They're picking whatever it was, 20-somethingth. And that would have been the chalk pick. Instead, they moved down. They take Kyle Duggar. Ultimately worked out, right? But that had kind of been what they did. This time, all right, Mac is the consensus. Boom, Mac. Christian Barmore was falling, and he was another guy that was tabbed as a fit. Falling, boom, get him. They didn't beat around the bush as much, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I think they just kind of went for it. And I think that's a good approach. This year, it's a little different. I don't know that the draft – see, the thing is, I think the draft, the way it was structured last year, it benefited them to do that. It made a lot more sense to do that last year. I don't know that it makes as much sense this year. Again, just the layout of it. We'll talk about this a lot in the coming weeks, where the top tier of this class is probably 16, 17 players. And they're sitting there at 21. So they're going to need a couple of teams to significantly reach. If not, how different is the board of 21 versus 31, 35, 41? That's traditionally something they weigh. And some years it makes sense to weigh it. Some years it doesn't. It felt like they did it every year. This is a year it feels like that's where you weigh that.
Yeah, we've talked about this a ton, and we continue to talk about it, and we're going to put it into practice once we start doing mock drafts and things like that, and really show you guys really the position that you're wondering about is as bad as some scouts and certain people, and I think you and I feel at times that this quarterback class is. You just don't know how many teams are going to actually reach on a quarterback, right? Sam Howell, whoever it ends up being, going higher.
Should not be Sam Howell.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say that should be Sam Howell.
I don't disagree with you. I just am saying that that is always the valuable commodity. So if you're the Patriots sitting there at 21, you do hope that one of these teams gets foolish and takes a quarterback. I guess the draft last year was a little bit more chalk. I think all of us expected if a quarterback was there at 15, given the situation at quarterback, it was very, very difficult for the Patriots to even think about passing on a QB. And it also just so happens that Mac Jones, who is probably the best stylistic fit out of the top quarterbacks, was the one that was on the board. So I can see what you're saying about it being more chalk, maybe a little bit more, what's the word, just standard, right? Or we're going to go with the brand names. We're going to go with the blue chippers. We're going to go with the big time college prospects versus a Kyle Duggar or versus somebody like that. But Isaiah Wynn, Sony Michel, N'Keal Harry, as much as he had his issues with the Patriots, those guys were blue chip, big time prospects as well.
Was N'Keal was like the 4th or 5th receiver on the board, though.
He was a consensus top 50, top 60 player.
Yeah, but remember, he was the second receiver off the board.
There was obvious conversations about where they picked him relative to the rest of the receivers. I would agree with that, but I don't think anybody thought that there was a big talent gap at the time between some of those guys. And I don't think it was a major surprise at the time that the Patriots took N'Keal Harry where they took him, maybe over A.J. Brown. That might have been the one that was a little bit of a head scratcher. But the days, like I see in the chat about Jordan Richards, when's the last time the Patriots took a Jordan Richards, right? Like, when's the last time they've really
2019, Jawan Williams.
I don't think that Jawan Williams is in Jordan Richards' category. Like, Jordan Richards was a guy that most people had pegged as a third round, day 3 pick.
Oh, I get what you're saying. Okay. And look, even some like Deron Harmon was supposed to be undrafted. So some of those work out. But yeah, you're right. They have done less of that. I would agree.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the mantra that Belichick always takes a guy that's supposed to go in the 6th round and the 2nd round. I don't think they've really done that in years. I think they've learned in a lot of ways from some of those picks. Jordan Richards, I know Cyrus Jones was supposed to be a much better player than he turned out to be, but maybe even a guy like Cy Jones, who was drafted big in part to return picks, right?
That was about where Cyrus Jones was supposed to go. Somebody said Duke Dawson in the chat. I think he might be one. I'm going back. Jordan Richards is 2015. So the next year is Cyrus Jones. Then they have that draft where they don't have any picks in the top 100, basically.
Right.
And then they took Duke Dawson the next year, and then you get into the N'Keal Harry draft. So maybe Duke Dawson. I don't really remember what his draft stock was. I can find it.
Like a top 100, top 150 player and a Florida guy, right? So still a big-time program player. I think that one was a little bit more of a surprise, but it certainly wasn't Jordan Richards, right? I don't think that we've actually seen them do that in quite some time. Will be interesting to see what this means, though, for their draft process. Whenever you promote a guy that has a really heavy background in college scouting and in the draft, you do think that that will put a heavy emphasis on his plate of what exactly they are doing with the draft. Maybe that's as simple as it is. Maybe they feel good about their ability with Elliott Wolf or some of the other guys there in the personnel department to work on pro personnel scouting, right? And want to give some more emphasis to the college scouting to a guy like Groh. And who behind the scenes, there's a very good chance that Groh is a guy that could have been somebody that was a little bit more of a rock star than what we knew, right? In terms of the draft last year or the draft in recent years. So there we go.